So for right now, we're going to, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview, a little bit of an introduction to Daniel, because truthfully what I find is we actually make a mistake when we just jump into a book without really, going through and understanding why that book is even here, right? And so tonight, I'll just go through a few things here. So first of all, we'll start with the date. And Daniel was actually written 2,500 years ago. So it was actually written back in the 6th century, so 605 BC. And just to give you some background, this is basically what happened if you're not sure about Jewish history. So after the reign of Solomon, there was this civil war, and how many tribes of Israel is there? 12. The 12 tribes of Israel split up. Now, does anyone know how they split up? They actually split up into two sections, okay? So they split up into a northern section and a southern section, and they split, basically what it was before the time of Solomon, Israel had one king. So it had, Saul was a king, and David was a king, and Solomon was a king. But then they had this civil war, and the tribes split up, and the northern kingdom became the kingdom of Israel. That's what it was called. And it had 10 tribes. So if you can see up there, there's the northern kingdom. And then the southern kingdom was called the kingdom of Judah. And it only had 2 tribes, which is actually quite interesting. And the northern kingdom lasted for 209 years, and then the Assyrians came in and conquered them. The southern kingdom lasted for 325 years until Nebuchadnezzar. So until Daniel, and then Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he invades Jerusalem. He actually invaded them 3 times. It was like 20 years between the first invasion and the last invasion. And on the 3rd invasion, he completely destroys Jerusalem, and he destroys the temple, and basically that's what, that's the background. Now, who knows the reason why God would have allowed them to be conquered? Why did God allow Israel to be conquered at all? Does anyone know? I don't know if you remember last session. God makes this covenant. He makes these 2 covenants. The first covenant he makes with Abraham, way back in Genesis 12, right? And he makes this covenant with Abraham, and that covenant is called the Abrahamic covenant, and it's this promise to Israel that they will be the receivers of land and seed and blessing, and that covenant was unconditional. So it doesn't matter what Israel does, it didn't matter what Israel did. That covenant was an unconditional covenant, meaning it wasn't dependent on man, it's only dependent on God. That's why God put Abraham in the deep sleep and walked through the animals himself. So Israel can never be replaced, Israel can never be canceled, because God has made this Abrahamic covenant, which is solely dependent on him alone, right? Now, that covenant hasn't been fully fulfilled yet, because of course there's never been a time where they had all the land. That won't happen till millennium. But Israel is still the owner of the promise. It's just that they're not the possessor of it yet. So all this stuff that's happening in the world right now, it'll be like this until Christ comes again, and that's when Israel will be the possessor of this promise, right? But God also made a covenant, and that was called the Mosaic covenant. So when Moses comes on the scene, God makes this covenant with Moses, but this was a different covenant because it was not conditional. So it was not unconditional, it was conditional. And the reason for that is because basically God made this covenant and said, here's how you need to follow me, Israel. But if you fall away and if you get caught up in, idol worship, then the Lord will discipline you, right? And that's what's happening here in the book of Daniel. Because Israel had been serving idols. They actually had been serving the idol of Baal and the idol of Asherah. And the idol of Baal was actually, he was a god of weather, which is interesting. So they thought they should worship him in order to get wealth. And then the goddess of Asherah was a goddess of fertility. And the way they worshipped her was actually by going to prostitutes. Incredible. And so Israel basically had stopped worshiping the Lord, and they had gone into this idol worship. And then they'd also stopped doing one other thing. Does anyone know? What had Israel stopped doing to allow God to have Babylon take over?
The Sabbath?
Yeah, that's right. So they had stopped. So what it used to be was they stopped practicing the Sabbath rest on the land. So what it was they were supposed to plant their crops, and then on the 7th year they were They were to give that land a rest. And you know what's funny? As I started studying this, my dad used to do that. I don't know if they still do it today, but I remember that vividly, where it was like, that was the year that it was followed, right? Like it was, yeah. Anyways, so they had stopped doing that. And so because of that, and because the Mosaic covenant is conditional, not unconditional, then the Lord allows Judah to be captured, okay? Okay, now, so that's the first part. Now I want to just go over some diversity of topics that we're going to, this is why Daniel's so incredible. It's not just a prophecy book, there's so much to cover in this book. So first of all, of course, we're going to cover prophecy, which of course is history in advance. And actually, Daniel's been referred to as the Old Testament book of Revelation, which is interesting. And the reason they say that is just because the book of Daniel actually unlocks the book of Revelation. So in this church, I know Pastor Mike is just finishing up the book of Revelation. So I thought it's kind of cool that we're doing Daniel right now, because they really work together, they really do. We're also going to talk about eschatology, which of course is the study of the end, which I believe we're very close to. And then we're going to talk about something called the knowledge of the intertestamental period, which is basically the time periods between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And people don't really talk about that, but it's fascinating, because when you read the end of Malachi, Persia is in control and the Jewish people are speaking Hebrew. But then you get to the New Testament, you get to the beginning of Matthew, and Rome is in power and the language of the day is Greek. And so it's like, what happened in those 400 years? And the book of Daniel actually predicts what happens. He tells us what happens, and so that's something we'll study. We're also going to study angelology. We're going to talk about how God uses angels, because of course when we get to Daniel 9, we know that whole battle of the spiritual realm. We're going to talk about spiritual warfare, because of course we know that we do not struggle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, you know, the powers of darkness. And to be totally honest, the moment you put your faith in Christ, this is just so true. It's just, you know, just so you think of what's happened in the last week here. The moment you put your faith in Christ, you know, for salvation, is the moment you're going to inherit some enemies. And one of them is the world, and one of them is the flesh, our own flesh, and of course the other one's the devil. And so we're going to be able to see that all through the book of Daniel. And then we're going to see how to live for God in a pagan society, because of course Daniel was taken into exile, into Babylon, incredibly pagan, culture. Actually, the distance between Jerusalem and Babylon was almost, well, it was 900 kilometers, which is almost from here to Winnipeg. I was actually just looking it up. So here's Daniel. He's taken out of his homeland. He's taken away from the temple. He's put on this pagan soil, and yet, he lives for God. He's such an uncompromising man. So we're going to learn how to do that. And then we're going to learn how God is sovereign over all the empires. So God is in control of every empire that comes into existence. He's in control for how long it stays into existence. He's in control, period. So we're going to learn all about that. And then just to give you one more background, Daniel, at the time we start here in verse 1, is around the age of 15. So he's quite young. And actually, I'll go to the next slide here. Do I have one? No, that's fine. He's just a teenager when we see him. And then we're going to talk about even just the authorship of Daniel. So a lot of people criticize Daniel and they say, well, he didn't really write it, it was someone else. But actually he did write it, and we'll go through and show you how that is the case. And then we're going to go through the message of Daniel, which is that the times of the Gentiles are revealed. So Daniel's book is really to reveal the times of the Gentiles. And then the purpose of the book of Daniel is to encourage Judah, basically to know how to live outside of the land, right? Okay, and then just lastly, when we read the book, the first 6 chapters are narrative, so it's like a narrative thing. The last 6 are prophetic, right? So I'm excited, and and we'll get right into it here, you guys. So actually, Daniel is one of only, I think I mentioned this when I taught Genesis, Daniel is only one of 2 men in the Bible, other than Christ, where there is not one negative thing mentioned about him, not one sin mentioned about him. Who knows the other one? Joseph. So just Joseph and Daniel are the only 2 men in all of Scripture where nothing negative is mentioned about them at all. So really interesting. Okay, well, let's just get going here. I'll just read this very tiny paragraph. The overview is very short here in this one. And it says this, it says, how tragic and unnecessary it was for Judah to fall. In many ways and over a long period, God had warned his people that a day of judgment would surely come if they did not repent. He had warned the people of the southern kingdom that he would judge them for their sin, but his warnings went unheeded. Okay, so that's the overview. Okay, so let's just get our verses here, you guys. And we'll go through one by one. So, let's have a drink here. Okay.
Can I just,
Yeah.
you said what period is Daniel written?
Yeah, in 602, 603 BC.
600.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
You
yes.
said 6.
Oh, no, no.
Okay.
Oh, no, 603. Yeah, that's right. 603 BC. Yeah. Okay, so let's just read the first verse here. So this is Daniel 1-8, Daniel taken to Babylon. So it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Okay, so first of all, we'll talk Jehoiakim, the king of Judah. He wasn't a king that was over all of Israel. Basically what he was he was placed there by the Pharaoh of Egypt. So he was just a puppet king. So he was not a king that the Lord, had called to reign over all Israel. So basically what's happened is Israel's in this strange time where they actually have no king reigning on David's throne, right? And there was no divine revelation coming in about what the plan of the Gentiles, would be. And basically that's the reason why the Lord is going to raise up Daniel, because they're in this strange time where there's no king that's ruling over all of Israel. So Jehoiakim is just a puppet king. He's been placed there by Pharaoh. So that's what you need to know. Okay, then it says, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, who was Nebuchadnezzar? He's this mighty ruler of the Babylonian Empire, right? His name means Nebu protects the crown, which I think is very interesting. So his name means basically that he's going to protect his own power, okay? And Babylon was the world power of the day. I do hope we understand that Babylon is going to come back, the actual city of Babylon. Sometimes people feel like they read the scriptures or they'll read Revelation and they'll go, oh, it's just a system. But it is a system, but it's not just a system. Babylon, the actual city of Babylon, will be rebuilt for the Antichrist kingdom. And so Babylon was this world power of the day. And we're going to see how actually Nebuchadnezzar was a type of what? Does anyone know? He was a type of Antichrist. It's really interesting. And he's only mentioned here in the first 4 chapters of the book, because when we get to chapter 5, his son, not his immediate son, but someone down the lineage named Belshazzar is going to take his place. So here we see Nebuchadnezzar is this godless pagan king. He thinks he's in control of everything, but he's not. He's going to discover that he's not. In fact, the only reason that he's in this position of power is because God put him there, because God's going to work through this wicked king for his purpose, right? And to be honest, that's true of every leader in history. God puts every leader in the position to somehow fulfill his purposes and to bring glory, right? And so what's fascinating is actually we'll see how Nebuchadnezzar's heart softens as we go through these first 4 verses. Actually, I believe we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. I'll show you that when we get to chapter 4. It's fascinating. But for now, we're going to deal with this godless pagan king. Okay, so then it says, and he came to Jerusalem and he besieged it. So Nebuchadnezzar comes against Jerusalem because what happened was the Pharaoh of Egypt invaded Babylon. And in response, Nebuchadnezzar defeats the Egyptians, and then he pursues the Egyptians, off into the wilderness, into Sinai, and along the way he invades Jerusalem, because Jerusalem had actually been loyal to Pharaoh. And so, again, remember the reason God allowed this to happen was because of the Mosaic covenant, right? Because it's a cycle of blessing, and being disciplined. But I think we have to also understand that Israel can never, even though God's going to discipline Israel, Israel can never, ever, ever be cast off. And it's like, why? Because of the Abrahamic covenant, right? So we have to make those distinctions. And the reason I hammer so hard on that is because it's an absolute reflection of our salvation. Here we are. Here I'm at camp this summer. And I share the gospel. And kids come to Christ. They believe, which that's all there is to salvation. It's believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved. So they believe, they understand, and they put their trust in Jesus Christ. Instantly, they are eternally secure. That's how salvation works, right? And that the moment we put our faith in. But who the Lord loves, he chastens. So when we step away from the Lord and we fall back into sin, the Lord, in his great mercy, is going to discipline us. And that's good. That's very good. Because we don't want to be, off on this, path our whole life of sin. And so in the same way, that's what happens to Israel, is that Israel was worshiping these, idols. The Lord is going to discipline Israel for his glory and, to bring Israel back. So all this happened in 605 BC. And like I say, this was the first invasion. Now, Nebuchadnezzar did 3 invasions, 1, 2, 3. The first one was 605, sorry, not 603. The next one, 597, and the next one, 586. So I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, now we'll get into verse 2 here. So verse 2 says, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God." Interesting. Okay, so the Lord gives Jehoiakim over to Nebuchadnezzar. Actually, Amir says in his book, he says, "The Babylonians would have swept through Jerusalem like a tornado." He said, "Death, destruction, and loss rallied behind them. By the time Daniel and his friends began their trek, they had nothing left of their former lives." So they would have been stripped of everything. There was nothing left. And this was actually prophesied in Isaiah 39:7, where it says, "And they shall take some of your sons who will descend from you, and they shall be eunuchs in the place of the king of Babylon." So this had been prophesied already, and this is what happens. Now, it says, so God gives Jehoiakim over to Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nebuchadnezzar, it says, with some of the vessels of the house of God. So what happens is Nebuchadnezzar takes some of the furnishings, some of the things out of the temple. Now, why would he do that? What would be the purpose of taking some of, of course, imagine this big, massive temple that Solomon, had built. Why would he want to take some of those vessels out of there? Basically, to declare that his God is better than their God. Basically, to declare that he's a conqueror, right? So he had no respect for the things of God. He had no respect for the temple. And what's fascinating is, remember how the Jews looked at the temple. Does anyone know what they thought? Does anyone know what the Jews thought as long as the temple was standing? First of all, we know that Solomon's the one who built it. They would have thought that as long as the temple was standing and as long as, they were there, everything would be okay. That was this false hope that they had, that as long as the temple was there, everything would be okay, right? And they would never have envisioned a time in history where it would have been destroyed. And I thought about that, and it's like, how do people today do? How are we like that today? Lots of people can hold on to lots of things, whether it's, maybe it's a good luck charm. I don't know. Maybe, who knows what it is, right? Or maybe they have this idea that as long as they have this, or as long as they have that, they'll be safe, right? And that's not true, because God wants us to be dependent on him. It's not the thing that makes us safe or the person that makes us safe. It's the Lord. We're to, depend on him. And so here we just see that Nebuchadnezzar is going to take some of these vessels and he's going to put it in his own pagan temple. So we see that his heart is a stone, it's basically stone cold, to be totally honest. But then we're going to see how God deals with him, and that's what's so incredible, because it shows us that actually no one is unreachable. Because God is going to reach Nebuchadnezzar, right? But right now he's this, again, wicked pagan king, and he takes these vessels out of, the temple, out of God's house, and he takes them to his own pagan temple. So this was a very, very low time for Judah, right? This was a very rock bottom place. Then it says, and he brought them to the land of Shinar. Now, does anyone know anything about the land of Shinar? Basically, what the word refers to 2 rivers. I don't know if you can see it up there. It refers to a place between the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, which is really interesting. So it's in modern day Iraq. And in modern day Iraq, I'm telling you, that's where the new Babylon's going to be built. Because that's where the original Babylon was, right? And that's where, in the time of Nimrod, that's where he built, the Tower of Babel. So modern day Iraq is where that is. Actually, a lot of scholars think that's where the Garden of Eden was too, which would be really fascinating. And that's where the children of Judah were taken. That's where the children of Israel were taken. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, just try to relate to Daniel, just for, 2 minutes. I think about that situation where here's young Daniel, he's 15 and he's ripped from his home and he's ripped from his family. His parents wouldn't have gone. This was all the young men, right? The young guys. He's ripped from everything that's familiar to him. And what's interesting is, he was a brilliant young guy. So he would have had plans. He would have had plans for his life in Jerusalem. He was from a noble background. He had a great education. He would have had very strong teaching in God's word. He probably was preparing maybe for a future in leadership, but God had different plans for him. And that's what we're really going to pull out of this lesson. God's ways are so much higher than our ways. They're infinitely better than our ways. And I actually had, this kind of makes me laugh, but I was thinking, what kind of plans did I have when I was 15? And I was trying to think, what did I think my life was going to be, at that young age? And I remember I thought I was going to be a journalist, which I'm like, oh, praise the Lord, I didn't do that. But I remember that, thinking I was going to be a journalist. And, I came from a very hockey family, and I love the Oilers, and I thought maybe I'll marry an Oiler, an NHL guy, but we'll have a place down in Okotoks, and he'll be a rancher too, because I'm from the farm. And oh mercy, I felt like all these crazy, oh dear, the Lord has a good laugh at us, I think. But anyways, all that to say, we can have these plans at whatever stage. But when you're young, sometimes we have these very outlandish plans. But maybe there's something in your life that that you've had planned, or that you want, that for a long time, but it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe you had a secure job, and all of a sudden it's been taken away, right? Actually, David Jeremiah preached a great message a few months ago about how we mustn't hold on so tightly to a dream, maybe, that we have, that we miss sight of the fact that God's plans are so much greater than our own, right? And so, that's basically what's happened here, is that here's Daniel. He would have had these plans, but all of a sudden it's all been stripped away. But that's where God shows up, and he demonstrates his absolute control and sovereignty, right? And actually, this is Woods. He says, actually, do you know, he says, as long as you were in that place of comfort, as long as we're in a place of comfort, he says, we really are not in a heartfelt position to receive from God. I think that's powerful. I'll just read again. He says, as long as you're in a place of comfort, where you're totally comfortable with everything, you're really not in a heartfelt position to receive from God. I think that's powerful, because we have to always be relying on him for everything, right? And so basically we see here that children of Israel are in this situation. Okay, now we'll get to verse 3 and 4 here, so I'll read them together. It says, then the king commanded, how would I say this? Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Okay, so this is very interesting. So here we see Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't only just, take the holy things from the temple. He also took what? He took Judah's future, really, because he took all these young men, and they were probably between the ages of 13 to 17, right? Nebuchadnezzar was no fool. He was brilliant. He was not a stupid man. And so what he did was he came first for the best and the brightest, and the young men that showed the most promise, and the people that were the most articulate. That's why he says youths without blemish, of good appearance, of skillful in all wisdom. And Nebuchadnezzar had this plan that he was going to take these young men, notice they weren't 70, but he's going to take these young men, 13 to 17, and he's going to brainwash them so that he can alter their worldview. And how's he going to do it? It says here with literature and language, he's going to do it through this, very intense educational program. And then once they were on his side, the plan would have been that they would have been able to talk the population of Judah basically into peacefully going along with Nebuchadnezzar. And it's like, where have we heard that before? Really, what does that sound? What does it remind you of? What kind of institution do we have in this country that would be very simple? Universities. It's the school system. It's mind-blowing. The exact same strategy that Satan had here, he has today. Because it's like, where do the best and the brightest go? Well, they go to university. And it's like, what do they learn at university? They're not going to learn Christian values, I can tell you that right now. That's the farthest thing they're going to learn. They're actually put through this, intense propaganda, campaign, so to speak, because the whole purpose is to alter their worldview, because the young people are the ones who are going to be the future doctors and lawyers and, preachers and politicians and all that stuff. So the strategy of Satan is actually basically to just use this over and over and over again to shift the culture. That's how it is. That's why the universities are so wow. And schools, same thing, right? People often say, well, how did your boys handle it at university? Because my boys both went to University of Calgary. I'm telling you, they came home every single weekend, 5 hours. I don't think Tanner ever, not once, stayed in Calgary. And if he didn't come home, Lauren and I went down there every weekend. There was never 2 weeks in a row that we didn't see them. And you think, well, that's crazy, but you do what you have to do in order to keep your kids grounded in the truth. Some people just throw them off to the wolves and they're like, yeah, we'll see you in a year. And I know sometimes there's situations where you can't see them that often, but boy, if you can, you just do all you can. Because it is an absolutely pagan environment, beyond. Anyway,
Jackie,
yeah.
can I just share something I
Yeah.
heard on
Yeah.
Flashpoint out of the United States tonight?
Okay.
And it was about in New York City,
Yeah.
how Mamdani, who is
Oh, yes,
so
I'm aware.
far
Yep.
now,
Yep.
and that's what he's going now.
Sure, the young.
30-year-old.
Yes. Absolutely. The Satan strategy hasn't changed. We live in a very Babylonian society. People don't quite recognize it, but that's basically what it is. And then it says he wanted the noble. So basically he wants to have noble blood. And then it says that he wanted them to be good looking. It wasn't just like whatever. He wants them to be good looking, and he wanted them to be without blemish. And that reminds me of Hitler. I'm not even joking. Because I don't know if you guys have, I listened to an historian, fascinating. It was a woman, and she did this whole history book of Hitler's last day. And it just blows your mind, because of course he married his mistress, just hours before they committed suicide. And they had to pledge that neither of them had any blemishes, any disabilities, and all those things in order to get married under his reign. Which of course they had lots, but anyways, fascinating. And so that's what he says there. And then it says in that verse, it says they had the ability to serve in the king's palace and teach the literature of the Chaldeans. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted these young men that could, grasp their culture, but he also wanted them to pick up the language very quickly, right? That's why he wanted them young. And so basically he's saying this, he's like, I don't want you, so what would the Israelis, what would they have studied at that age? What would it have been called?
The Torah.
Yeah, the Torah. So they would have studied the Torah, of course, which is Old Testament, the first 5 books. And he would not have wanted them to study the Torah. He wouldn't have wanted them to study the Pentateuch. He would have wanted them to study the system, the methodology of the Babylonian religion, right? This is actually, again, Woods, what he says. He said he would have said something like this. I want to expand your minds. I want to broaden your understanding. I want to make you more tolerant towards alternative lifestyles or worldviews, because I'm going to use you as a propaganda tool. That is profound, because that's really what it's all about, right? And so there is a reason why it's so hard to get even vulgar books and stuff out of the school libraries. It's all part of brainwashing, right? And Nebuchadnezzar, I'm telling you, he's the guy that wrote the book. This goes, all of the stuff that we're facing today goes all the way back to Babylon. It truly does. And then, it doesn't mention it here, but another thing that they, qualification, that they didn't mention, but that was there, is that they would have told these guys, you're welcome to hold on to whatever God you worship, back home, as long as you put the Babylonian God first. So it was a polytheistic society there, right, where they worshipped a whole bunch of gods, but they would have wanted, of course, the Babylonian gods to be above their own God, right? And of course, that was a huge problem for Daniel and his friends, because why? What did God say in?
Other gods.
Yeah, you shall have no other gods before me, right? And it's the same for us. We are in the same way. We should have no other gods before our God, right? Okay, and then lastly, we see that the king commanded the chief eunuch was in charge of the young boys. So we saw that in 3 where it says, then the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch. Why do you think it was this chief eunuch that was put in charge of these young boys? What was the purpose of being a eunuch? Why did Nebuchadnezzar in that society take these boys and make them into eunuchs?
And take their power, their drive away.
Yeah, it's so that they would have absolute 100% loyalty to the king. That was the whole purpose. So that way they couldn't marry and they couldn't have children. And it's just unbelievable. But that's what they would have done. And of course, basically what they did was they were sexually mutilated. And it's like, doesn't that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
It's so fascinating, you guys, because you look in our culture and you can see these types of things all around us, right? And it's to alter God's perfect creation so that you are wholly loyal to Satan's agenda. It's incredible. So here's Daniel, here's his friends, all of their dreams are, what they thought they were going to be are gone. Their dreams of being a father are gone. Their dreams of having a family are gone. And yet it is unbelievable how we'll see that they just still held on to the hope of Christ, and they still follow the Lord in all things. So, okay, let's do 5 to 7 here. So then it says this. It says, the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Okay, so here we see so far that there's been these mental requirements. They had to be smart, they had to learn the education, social requirements, and now we're going to see this physical requirement. So basically what it would have been is the Babylonian government would have provided the food for these men in training, almost kind of like government-funded tuition, so to speak. And it would have been a very special honor, actually, to have the food prepared by the king, or from the king's table. So that's what they're going to do. And notice how long they're to be in this school. It says the king assigned them daily portions of food and wine, and they were to be educated for 3 years. It is not by accident that our universities are 4 years. It just isn't, because the longer, if you can have a young person for that amount of time, you can really indoctrinate them, right? It's it's interesting, even with this whole Charlie Kirk thing, and I of course I don't know all that's true and not true, but the guy that's in custody and the guy that they're charging, it's interesting how his parents apparently were quite conservative, like as far as politically, and he went through school and completely changed, right? So it's just very fascinating. It's, again, just the strategy of the enemy. And so Nebuchadnezzar, again, wasn't a fool, and he knew how long it would take. And so that's what it says there. Okay, now it says, among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. Okay, so here we see, actually I'll read 7 as well. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, some people pronounce it differently, and Azariah he called Abednego. Some say Abednego, but I say Abednego. And so, okay, so these 4 young boys here, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they're from the tribe of Judah. They've been taken in because obviously they had the traits that Nebuchadnezzar wanted, and it says he changes their name to Babylonian names. Now why? Why does he, begin to start with that? Why would he want to change their names? What did names mean back then?
Identity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Names had such incredible meaning back then, right? Actually, often they would wait to name the baby until the child, was a little bit older, and they could see the personality of the child before they named the child. And so basically, what the scoop here is that Nebuchadnezzar wants to rebrand these boys, these Jewish boys, and he wants to give them Babylonian names because they've got these godly names. So I'll just go here. So we'll just go through what they mean. So Daniel, his name means God is my judge. Hananiah, his name originally meant Yahweh is gracious. Mishael, his name meant who is like God. Azariah, his name meant Yahweh has helped. So what does this show us? Here's these 4 guys, these 4 boys, and they all have these godly names. So what does that immediately tell us? They all came from these godly Jewish homes because their names reflect something of the character of God, right? They came from homes that would have completely honored God and taught these boys the way they should have gone. So I just want to read a couple verses. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way they should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 says, these words which I have commanded you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. So these boys had parents that obviously honored God and taught their children the principles of God, right? And what's interesting is we're going to see how that godly training that these 4 boys have is going to be manifest here. We're going to see, how that's going to pay off. But this is why, if you're a parent or you're a grandparent, oh man, don't ever give up. You keep on teaching your kids the truth, and I don't care what age they are. I don't care if they're, 5 or 50. I think of my mom, even, my mom's been gone for 5 years now, but even before she went to heaven, oh my goodness, my mom, I learned stuff from her till the day she passed. Didn't matter what my age was, right? Because we must do that, because we've been commanded to do that. And one day the kids are going to go off and they're going to make their own decisions, and they're going to make up their own minds, and they're going to be sitting in classrooms, and they're going to be sitting in university, and they're going to hear a whole bunch of garbage from the professor. And that's when you're going to see, God at work. And I was thinking of Hunter. I've told this story before, but I think it was his first year of university at UC, and he had to take an English class. He didn't go in for English, he was business, but he had to take an English class, and the book that they had given them to read was so vulgar. It was so beyond vulgar, I can't even describe it, that he went up to the prof, a very, liberal kind of prof probably. He went up to the prof and he said, listen, I can't read this book. It's beyond vulgar. He's like, but if you give me a different book, I'll do the report on a different book. And do you know what that prof said? He said he had never, ever, ever had one student who came up to him and said that. Think about that. I don't know how many years this guy had been a prof, but it's like, you can't tell me that there wasn't other Christians through the years that had gone into his class. And yet, he's like, that's the first time that's ever happened, and he let Hunter do that. He let him do a different book, right? And so, again, you would be, sometimes I think we're shocked, but I'm telling you, when you raise your child, in the way they should go, the Lord is with them. So here we see that he wants to change these their names because they're godly names. So then it says he changes them to these Babylonian names. So I'll just go through what they mean. So Belshazzar means lady protect the king. Or he changed Daniel's name, to Belshazzar, which means lady protect the king. Hananiah he changed to Shadrach, which means I am fearful of God. Mishael he changed to Meshach, which means I am of little account. And Azariah he changed to Abednego, which means servant of Nebo, meaning Nebuchadnezzar, right? So he's trying to turn them into his servants, not of Yahweh, but of the Babylonian pantheon, so to speak, right? And the reason he's doing this is because Nebuchadnezzar is going to challenge basically the sovereignty of God. And it's like, how? How is Nebuchadnezzar challenging the sovereignty of God by changing their name? Because when you name something, you have authority over it. This is why you go back to Genesis, and you go back to, right in the Garden of Eden, and it's interesting. It's like, what does God say to Adam and Eve? In Genesis 1:26, he says, let them, meaning Adam and Eve, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the cattle and over all the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, which is significant because what God is doing is he's allowing Adam to name the animals. That's why in Genesis 2:19, it says, out of the ground the Lord formed the beasts of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man, meaning Adam, called the living creature, that was its name. So it's not an accident that God allowed Adam to name the animals, because he told Adam and Eve that they were to have authority over the animals. It's the same today, we're to have authority over the animals. So when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he starts renaming these young men, and from their godly names to Babylonian names, basically he's saying, hey, I'm God. You're not in charge, I am. And I thought about that. When people use pronouns, those kind of things, you know what they're saying? They're saying, God, you're not in charge, I am. I can be my own God. I can do whatever I want, right? And so it's not that Nebuchadnezzar just went into the temple and took God's vessels and did all these things. He actually, he really, really basically challenged the authority of God because he's changing their name. But again, we're going to see that Nebuchadnezzar was not in control. We're going to see through the rest of the book of Daniel that he is not in control at all. Okay, now we'll just finish off with verse 8 here. So verse 8 says this. It says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself." Okay, we're ending with verse 8 here, and I don't want to get super into verse 8 because next week when we finish the last half of the chapter, it's so much about the food. But here it says, Daniel resolved, another version says made up his mind, that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Okay, this is interesting here because we see that Daniel's going to request that he won't defile himself. And now, do you know what's so interesting about that word defile? He would have said that to the eunuch. He would have said, "May I have different foods so that I don't defile myself?" What does it mean to defile himself? What is he saying? He's saying this is a spiritual thing. He's not going up to the eunuch and saying, "Oh, sorry, I'm gluten-free," which I mean, I can't have gluten either. But he's not giving an excuse like that. He's saying, "I can't have this food because that food would defile myself," which means that I would be going against my God. So he's unafraid to say to the eunuch, "Actually, this goes against my faith. I can't have this food." You know, he's not making an excuse, right? And it was a big deal because what could devout Jews not do with regards to food? Yeah, they couldn't eat food sacrificed to idols. Actually, this food, it would have been sacrificed to idols. It wouldn't have been kosher either. Like, you know, there would have been a few things, right? And so basically, Daniel understands. Remember, he's 15 years old. He's not 35 or 45. He's 15 years old. And he understands that if he is to eat this food, basically it would defile him. And he doesn't want to go against God. Actually, what's fascinating is when you read the New Testament and you read that, that portion where Paul is talking and he's like, "Listen, you can eat pork, you can eat whatever you want." And the church had been, Israel had been so saturated in this law, of the food, that many of them, even though they were saved, they still lived by that law because it was so ingrained in them, right? And so anyways, we just see here that Daniel is unafraid. He makes up his mind. He's not going to defile himself. And the kicker is nobody would have known because he's 900 miles away from home. It would, he's young, and there would have been lots of other Jewish boys who would have eaten the food. It would have been very good food as far as like pleasing to the eye and all those things. But what's so incredible is that because Daniel is faithful in this little thing, that is what basically was the catalyst. That is what the Lord looked at, that he was faithful in this little thing, and therefore the Lord can elevate him and put him in these big, places of prominence, right? And so he basically realized that his relationship with God touched every area of his life, not just one thing, but even what he ate. And I just want to read Philippians 4:8. It says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is good, if there is any excellence, and if anything worthy of praise, think on these things." So if we relate this to our own life, it's like, oh, should I watch this movie or should I not? Should I eat this or should I not? Should I take part in this conversation or should I not? Should I read this book or should I not? God gives us this test and he says, is what you're doing honorable? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it of good report? Is it worthy of praise? And that's basically what Daniel did, is he made sure that everything that he was doing was completely God-honoring, right? And he made up his mind not to defile himself. What I was thinking, I read somewhere, I don't know if it's true, I read somewhere the other day that, and I don't eat at KFC, but that KFC has gone all halal meat and stuff now. I don't know if that's, but anyway, I won't eat there. I understand that we are a new creation, and I understand that Paul's like that. Those things don't have power over us. But in my spirit, I know, what I'm doing or not doing, if it's honoring God or not, right? And so here is Daniel. He stands firm. And when we pick this up next week, we're actually going to see just what an incredible, how God blessed him for doing that. And which is interesting because he would have had so many consequences for if it had gone wrong, right? Because of course it was the king, ordered the menu, and there was a huge risk of punishment. Nebuchadnezzar was brutal, right? Like it wasn't just that he'd kill you. There was so many ways that they would actually torture you. And so this would have been a very big thing, and yet Daniel purposed in his heart not to compromise. And I think if we take away anything out of this book, well, many things, is that Daniel never, ever, ever compromised, ever. It was like, this is the truth, I'm gonna stand on the truth, and that's that. And so, so as we just close here, and we're gonna get into some questions, I would just ask us, to search ourselves, and to, are we willing to be like Daniel in this regard, right? And to just set our minds on the things of God and not compromise even a little bit. Do you know what I mean? No matter what we face, maybe we, people ridicule us, or maybe there's family dissension, or I don't know, maybe there's harassment in your workplace. But God will honor you for honoring him, and that's what we're going to see in the book of Daniel. So we're going to stop here at verse 8 so that we can do some questions. But any questions before we get into that?